Hey friend, and welcome to the study on the Doctrine of Balaam and the Doctrine of the Nicolaitans. Don't forget, if you like this video, subscribe, share it, like it, and let me know what you think in the comments below. So we're going to look at two doctrines, the Doctrine of Balaam and the Doctrine of the Nicolaitans. These doctrines are mentioned in Revelation chapter 2, and we're looking at Revelation chapter 2, and we'll look at verse 14 and 15. It says here, "But I have a few things against thee, because thou hast there them that hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed unto idols, and to commit fornication. So hast thou also them that hold the doctrine of the Nicolaitans, which thing I hate." These are Jesus' words here. And so the church of Pergamos, Pergamos, it means fortified high tower, like a citadel, height. So this was a church in Pergamos that was in a very precarious and also powerful position, I believe. Yet, even though they occupied this status and that their name signifies this importance, they had some serious problems. The serious problems was they had the doctrine of Balaam and the doctrine of the Nicolaitans. And what gives us an idea on how bad these doctrines really are is actually a lot that goes behind the name. Let's look at the two names. Balaam, for example. Balaam means disturber or destruction of the people. That name should signify us a lot. So I think if we hold on to the doctrine of Balaam, we will ultimately be destroyed. We will lose our salvation and we'll be quite disturbed in our understanding of things. Secondly, Nicolaitans. Root name is Nicholas. Nicholas means conqueror of the people. I believe that those who hold these two doctrines, doctrine of Balaam and doctrine of Nicolaitans, will be destroyed and conquered by the devil. And we don't want that, friends. We want to be saved. And so let's look at the doctrine of Balaam first. What was it all about? Well, in Numbers chapter 22 and to chapter 24, from 22 to 24, we have the whole story surrounding Balaam and Balak. Balaam, he was all about serving himself and making money at the expense of other people. Balaam wanted the benefits of the Moabite king Balak, and so he tried to curse the Israelite people, the Hebrews. And so Balaam tried to do that, but he was unsuccessful in doing that. And so he had to figure out a scheme on how to remove the protection of God from the people. And the only way which he could do that would be to get them to get into sin, into outright rebellion from God. That was his plan. So Balaam concocted this scheme, and he was all about serving himself. And in the service of himself, he concocted this scheme. And in Revelation chapter 2, verse 14, it tells us how he taught Balak to cast a stumbling block before the children of Israel, to eat things sacrificed to idols, and to commit fornication. So Balaam, he set out a feast. And this feast would involve eating food sacrificed to idols, as well as committing fornication. So the sexy Moabite women, they would come in their mini skirts, so to speak, and they would entice the Hebrew people into committing fornication, adultery even. And that was the plan. And so this all has to do with sin. So the idea was get them to sin against God so that God's protection is removed, so that now they can be cursed and fall under a plague and under destruction. And Balaam's plan was successful. He was motivated and he was led by Satan to do this. So when we're looking at the core of the doctrine of Balaam, it's all about going into sin. The doctrine of Balaam is all about following your own way, follow your heart, to serve yourself and to benefit personally. That reminds me of somebody else in the Bible named Judas. Remember Judas, he associated with the people of God. He was counted as a disciple. And like Balaam, he was also counted as a prophet amongst the people of God, but he was a false one. He was one who was serving himself. Judas was also called a disciple, but he was serving himself. And he sold out Jesus for pieces of silver, all for personal benefit. He wanted to be associated with Jesus for personal benefit, for money and for power. Balaam, he was a prophet of God. He was considered that by the people. And this Balaam was all about serving himself at the expense of the people. And he betrayed, just like Judas betrayed. As we keep on looking at the doctrine of Balaam, we understand that 1 Timothy 6:10 says that the love of money is the root of all evil. And Balaam was all about serving himself for money. It was the love of money. And Jesus even said that a man cannot serve two masters. He will either love the one or hate the other. Matthew 6, verse 24 says how we cannot serve God and mammon. Judas and Balaam were all about serving God and serving themselves, serving money even, their own personal benefit. So that's the idea. The doctrine of Balaam is all about living for yourself, living to please yourself, following your own heart, your own way, at the expense of others, at the expense of God's will. That is the essence of the doctrine of Balaam. And if you want more reading, you can read Signs of the Times, November 25th, 1880. You can read Patriarchs and Prophets, the book Patriarchs and Prophets, from page 440 to 441. Now, let's get into the Doctrine of Nicolaitans. Doctrine of Nicolaitans, to understand what they believed and what they taught, we have to look to the 2nd century. In the 2nd century, in their writings, we have a reference here about what they believed. They believed that the deeds of the flesh do not affect purity of soul, that the deeds have no bearing on our salvation. That's what they believed, that works have no bearing on their salvation at all. They believed that by believing, they are released from doing, and that they have no obligation to obey God's law. In other words, believe, 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 and you're saved. Do as you please, just believe. And that's what we hear from many pulpits today. Just believe and you're saved. Believe, believe. And they'll say, many will teach, we have no obligation to keep God's law. That's been put away. I mean, if that were true, if we were to say that God's 10 commandments were nailed to the cross, that means that your wife can be my wife. That means that if I don't like you, I can kill you. That means that I don't have to worship God, I can worship myself. That means I don't have to worship on the Sabbath, I can worship on any day of the week. You see that? Would you like to live in a world where God's law was truly nailed to the cross? Where God's 10 commandments were put away? Would you like to live in a world like that? I don't want to, and neither should you. God's commandments are still binding. And we are obligated to keep God's law for salvation and for unity amongst ourselves. Jesus said the first 2 great commandments are to love God with all your heart and love each other as you would love yourself. So we are not released from obedience. We must obey, and we must have good works. And if you want more details on the relationship between faith and works, I invite you to read the letter of James, James's letter in the New Testament. It really outlines that we need to have faith and works. And our faith works by love. Our faith works by love. And this is something that we have to keep in mind. Our faith works by love. And our love is the key to our obedience. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. If you love me, keep my commandments. That was the major teaching from Jesus. So if we love Jesus, we'll keep his commandments. And so that by believing in Jesus, we are not released from keeping the law. We must, out of love for Jesus. That's the point. And so we do have an obligation to have good works. We do have an obligation to keep God's law. And that's the point here. The doctrine of Nicolaitans is very dangerous. And remember how I was telling you about the doctrine of Balaam? And how basically Balaam, how he got God's protection to leave the people of the Hebrew people was through getting them to break God's law, fornication. That's committing sin. That is committing and breaking one of the 10 commandments. And so if we want God's blessing, we want God's protection, then we must keep God's commandments with all of our heart. Not because we're doing it to be saved per se, but because we love Jesus. And that it was actually Jesus' death on the cross shows us that there is a penalty for sin, and that penalty for sin is death. The wages of sin is death. And so Jesus died for our law breaking to give us a way to be saved. And I can't be saved by my own good works, but I am saved by what Jesus has done for me. And by gratitude for what Jesus has done for me, I am moved to keep God's law. For it was the breaking of the commandments in the first place which led to Christ's death. We have all sinned and come short of the glory of God, and we need Jesus' perfect righteousness imputed to us. And we also need the sanctification. Not only just imputed righteousness, but we need sanctification, the day-by-day experience and growing in holiness. And so the doctrine of the Nicolaitans is very dangerous because it basically removes that whole sanctification component which is needed for salvation. Yes, justification is important. Yes, believing in Jesus is important. I don't want to diminish those things. But we also need sanctification, and that will be God's work in us, keeping the commandments through love and through faith. And so I hope this whole study has been good for you, and you've learned something from this, as I have learned in this whole study for myself. If you want some more reading on the Doctrine of the Nicolaitans, I would recommend Signs of the Times from February 25th, 1897. You can read paragraphs 6 to 7. You can also read Bible Echo, February 8th, 1897. Those are some good references there to give you a background. And these writings are from Ellen G. White, a wonderful writer. I'd highly recommend that you read her writings. So I hope this study has been beneficial for you. Please join me again in other studies, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. God bless you until we study again.